Speaking of athletes in recovery, we got one right here, still going at it in the Bay Area, along with all the great analysis he provides the people of Northern California. Jim Barnett, Golden State Warriors, color commentator, and studio analyst for the Comcast Sportsnet Bay Area. Also, longtime NBA veteran. Our interview with Jim is being brought to you by Audible. Audible is a leading source of audiobooks online with over 180,000 downloadable titles to choose from nonfiction to fiction to periodicals. Audiobooks are great to listen to wherever you are and whenever you want. And for our Celtics Beat audience members, Audible's offering your first audiobook for free to give you a chance to try out. For my money, one of my favorite sources going, log on to audiblepodcast.com/Celtics. Grab your free audiobook. That's audiblepodcast.com/Celtics. And I personally cannot thank Audible enough for not just supporting this podcast, but for the service they do provide. That's audiblepodcast.com/Celtics. So, Jim, big story going now, obviously going into Game 4. A lot of people, myself included, still felt good about Golden State's chances because, A, they were the better team, in my opinion, and B, I personally thought Steve Kerr was smart and pragmatic enough of a coach where he'd make the appropriate adjustments. To say he did so, obviously, is a sort of stating the obvious. We know what the key adjustment they made. Obviously, going small, how much of a factor is that going to play in these final 2 to 3 games of the series in your mind here?
Well, I think it's everything because Cleveland had controlled the previous 3 games, the first 3 games of the series. The Warriors did win one in overtime. It was amazing how the first 2 games went, both of them overtime. Cleveland could have come away from Oakland, California with a 2-0 lead. The Warriors could have come away with a 2-0 lead. Those games are both up for grabs. But there's no question in anyone's mind that Cleveland controlled the pace. They controlled the tempo. At that time, they had the best player on the floor in LeBron James, who was averaging 40 points a game in those 3 games. And something had to change. The Warriors were getting very, very few fast break points. And that's not the way they play because not only the fast break points that they get, but the speed, if they can get down the floor, even if they don't get a fast break point, the defense doesn't have time to get set, and then they move the ball, and that's when you get Thompson open for his threes, and Steph Curry gets open for his threes without having to work so hard. And so they went small, took a big risk, and it paid huge dividends for them, and I don't see them making any changes because they were the aggressors. It made them, I thought for the first time in the series, Larry, that they met the challenge of Cleveland, and they met the middle toughness, and they met the aggressiveness head on, and they actually, I thought that's the game they controlled because of those indicators.
Yeah, I also sort of want to stick upon that in terms of the switch that they made because it seems that younger coaches, and I hate to sort of apply sweeping generalizations, of course that's what we do here in Boston. We've been noted for it the last 50 to 60 years of our existence, but in my opinion it looks like these younger coaches are far more apt to making, adjustments like that, or as opposed to, the old school disciplinarians of back in the day, it was Pat Riley, and of course there was Red Auerbach, our way or the highway, Vince Lombardi in football. I mean, how do you feel about that? I know you're very strong in terms of Steve Kerr, talking about out-of-bounds plays. Is one of his biggest strengths his pragmatism?
I totally agree with what you're saying there about the old schools. And Steve, this wasn't his idea. This didn't come from Alvin Gentry. It didn't come from one of his assistant coaches. It came from a kid who used to be the video coordinator who travels with the team. He worked with Steve while Steve was a GM in Phoenix, and he brought it up at a dinner, and it didn't get too many good reviews. And he kept watching film, and it's 3 a.m. He sent a text to Steve, and Steve said, "You know what? Let's try it." And I think it's really he's bold. He's willing to take a risk, and he felt there was a sense of urgency to do something different. And so they tried it, and of course it got off to a horrendous start at 7-0. They were getting killed on the boards. He called a timeout, but he stayed with it, and eventually, it worked for them. So when I say that he's pragmatic, yeah, absolutely, very pragmatic. I think he's got his ego under control. He'll listen to any kind of idea, and to me it just changed the series because now the Warriors have home court advantage again.
Yeah, and one final sort of point as I get on that, it's interesting too because you make a move like that, it doesn't work out. You get questioned like in the the media like crazy, and all of a sudden a move like that could be dubbed a panic move. Not going sticking to your guns. So you mentioned home court advantage because the Warriors do have it back. I got to admit, last week on the show, I completely butchered my prediction for the series because I completely forgot the finals switched back from a 2-3-2 back to the original 2-2, 1-1-1 as it was back in the many days. I remember reading Larry Bird had a quote a long time ago. I think it was in one of the books he wrote, and he was infuriated back in 1985 how when they switched to the 2-3-2 originally, he didn't have Game 5 back in Boston. He thought that played a really important factor as it allowed really the Lakers to return to Boston, needing just that one win. Do you think that's going to make any difference in this series? How important is it that Game 5 tonight is in Oakland as opposed to being in Cleveland for the long three there?
If this had played out as it is, the first two games have been split, I would say Cleveland would have had a big edge if we were back to 2-3-2. Okay? Because then they go home for 3 games. My goodness. And if they win the first 2 there, they're up 3-1. So, it's different. It's hard to project all that. But all I can speak of, Larry, is just today and what it's like today. I like the 2-1-1-1. The travel's tough that way. Personally, as a personal level, I don't like that. But I just think it's more fair, and I just think it's more fair to both teams do it that way. They do all the other series that way. So, I want to. Can I just digress for a moment? What you said about Pat Riley and Phil Jackson, even. Yeah, you're right about the old school guys that they get it into the middle, go down. They most of those guys hate the 3-point line and they go against it. But I'm not sure. I'm not saying I like it because I don't like developing 6'10", 6'11" players who can't play with their back to the basket, have no inside moves, who want to develop 3-point shots so they can go stand in the corner and wait for a point guard to dribble penetration and kick it out to them. I think it's boring basketball. The Warriors shoot a lot of threes, but it's not boring basketball. There's a lot of penetrations, a lot of different things going on. But this league, if you're not, and that's what beat Memphis. That's what beat Memphis with the Warriors. They did not have any 3-point shooting, and it cost them. You're not going to win with Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol any longer without help from the 3-point range. And I think that's what you brought out about old-time coaches. They get a little stubborn, and you've got to get with today's players. It's like music or anything else. You've got to grow with the times. So I just wanted to get that in because I really didn't answer and comment about your Pat Riley comment.
No, it's no problem. I just sort of think of obviously not just the old-time NBA coaches, but really just the old school coaches, sort of like Vince Lombardi, who was just I can't remember one of his many 10 zillion catchphrases. It was this is the way we're going to play, and if your best is better than our best, you deserve to win. But obviously now with really the analytics and everything, and you mentioned young video coordinators. It's really funny too when you talk about a video coordinator. It seems like that's how so many of these guys start out, like Eric Spoelstra out there in Miami, right. And all they have all this analysis that many of us consider goofy, and I'm not going to lie, it's one of them. But hey, who knows? Maybe MIT might very well become a factory now for NBA coaches or baseball executives or whatnot with the new age of sports, as opposed to computer programming or whatever it is, though. But
yeah, but there's you got to have a balance of all that stuff. Let me just caution that too. They aren't robots, and you go through all this stuff. You can tell a player, hey, you can't go to the left. Go out and take away his right hand. They get on the floor and they run at him. And they run straight at him rather than take away the right hand. They run at a 3-point shooter who can't shoot, and then he drives around. And there are a zillion cases like that. I look at guys, and I've been doing games for the Warriors for 30 years, and I'm going, are these guys? Do they blank out? Do they space out and don't think about what's going on? Why would you run at Tony Allen in Memphis when he's 25 feet away from the basket and let him go around you and drive? In fact, you know what I would do if I were guarding Tony Allen? I would go back into the paint. And wherever you were, I would say, would you please shoot the ball? You're at 18 feet. There's nobody on you. Please take the shot. I'd like him to take 25 shots from there. Now, he might hit 11, but Randolph and Gasol aren't getting it down low. But people don't do that. And so you got all these analytics and all this kind of stuff. Do you think these players know that Steph Curry shoots better from the right corner than the left, or the left than the right when they're out there on the court? Do you really think anybody in the NBA defending nowadays understands that and says, I'm going to keep him out of the right corner?
Yeah, it was actually interesting you brought up, though. I remember Kevin Durant having some sort of comment like that when they introduced that. I think it's the Sport View, where he shot, I think, 1 year in the playoffs. Like, I think it might have been 2012, the year they made it to the NBA Finals, where he shot something like 65% from. Right now, I'm just making up a number, but he shot some very high percentage from like the far wing from the three-point line, and he said he had a comment somewhere in the media like, yeah, I got these young kids telling me I need to take more three-pointers from this wing, and that's stuff I don't think about, but it's there for him now, I guess.
It's funny. I didn't need analytics to know where my strength was in playing basketball, okay? And you also have to react to the defense and take what the defense gives you. I knew that I wasn't a great outside shooter, so my mentality was always try to get to the basket. That's why I developed a good first step. So, but I didn't know whether I was going to go left or right from any side of the court or anywhere, but my defender was going to tell me. Whereas players today, it's interesting you said that. A lot of guys, players that you think are going to be stars, and maybe some of them are a bit stars because we anoint them that way anyway, which is a grievance of mine, they make their mind up what they're going to do with the ball before it even comes to them, and it's not dependent on what the defender does. I mean, it's totally, and consequently, they're not as efficient as they should be. And so, when he said that, you're talking about being in the playoffs there, it looks like that he would know where his strength would lie and what side of the floor. And I knew that if I were going to shoot from the outside, I like the corners and I like the top of the key. And so, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to take shots from other places if that's what the defense is, if that's what I've earned and so forth like that. So, but I will also say this. These players today are much better athletes than we were 30 and 40 years ago. Much better athletes. They're from the neck down, they run faster, they jump higher, they're bigger, they're stronger. But from the neck up, Larry, they're not as good. Did you know that? They're not as good. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do understand what you're saying. There seems to be a key part of the human body that seems to be from the neck up, and I guess it isn't just the eyebrows as well.
They haven't learned how to play the fundamentals and all those things. And if they had those, they would be a good player. Could be a great player. And there are players on every team like that. That if you ask a lot of players, NBA players, particularly young ones. And see, we had to go to college for 4 years. I'm not on some grievance thing here, but here's the deal. You ask a lot of players, what's your go-to move? They can't tell you. They can't tell you. We had Mikal Petrus playing for the Warriors, and he would step out of bounds inevitably. He couldn't go forward from the corner without going backwards, without trying to step backwards. And he had a left foot pivot foot, he'd put it back right, and it would go out of bounds. He did it 3 times in one game. So I told the coaching staff at that time, I'm not going to tell you who it was or whatever, but I said, I think I have a way to solve that. And he said, what's that? I said, ask him when he catches the ball just once in a while, have a right foot pivot foot. Because I'll bet you he wouldn't put his left foot back because he wants to go forward with that foot. And the coach told me, who, by the way, was the head coach at the time, said, oh, I could never do that. I said, why? He said, it would only confuse him.
I think we have to blame the France public schools, though, for that, or their school system over there.
Okay.
So we're on the top of analytics, and I'm going to ask you a question where you might even just hang up on me. But recently, 538.com published a piece where they ran some formulas that had this Warriors team, I think, is one of the 5 best NBA teams in NBA history. Obviously, we know what they would have to do for them to take their place amongst the elite of the elite. If they are able to close this deal, and I hope I'm really not getting you mad here, where could you see this Warriors team ranks amongst the greats? Obviously, you had the Wilt team that knocked off Russell back in 1967. Some of those great Celtics and Lakers and Bulls teams.
Okay, I got you. First of all, I've never heard of 5.38 or 38, whatever the heck you said. I've never heard of them. And I read some stuff because people send stuff to me, and our PR people do a good job. To be a great team, you can't be a one-hit wonder. Okay. You've got to sustain it over a period of years. You can't just do it for 1 year. That great Philly team that you're talking about in '67, which beat my Boston Celtics team, and that's why I don't have a ring, they were great. They were voted the greatest team they won 69 games that year. That was last year playing 81 games. But those Celtic teams won 10 championships in 11 years. Those Laker teams that lost in the finals to the Celtics for so many years before they won in '72, those were great teams with Elgin Baylor and Jerry West. the Milwaukee teams of the early 70s and also the Knicks. And I have to tell you, I've never thought about where this team ranks in history. So I can't give you an honest, I'm not going to hang up on you. I just never thought about it. And why do we even have to talk about it? Because why do we need something so soon all the way? Why do you, when you come out of college, why do you need to buy a brand new BMW? What do you have to look forward to? Okay, now you're bringing out some of the things. How can we tell this is a team that may or may not win an NBA championship? They won 67 games. They may win a championship this year, next year, and the year after, and never win 67 games again in the regular season. They may only win 64 or 61, but still go on and win the championship. So I'd have to sit and think about it for a long time and all the teams and this and that, and it's hard to compare eras. There's no question, as I said before, these guys are better athletes. Do you think Jerry West, Oscar Robertson, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell could play in today's game if they were here?
I would say so, absolutely. But
You're damn right.
Yeah.
You're damn right. The great players could, absolutely. But there would be some players in my era who couldn't play. They would be too slow, and they wouldn't do it. But there would be some that you would surprise the hell out of you because they can shoot the basketball. There have been a lot of great shooters around besides Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. And all these other guys that you talk about down the line there. Everybody wants to anoint it, but it's our day. It's our age. Everybody, we're generation NBA 3.0. I don't know. Guys that I talk to, Al Attles, the last coach that won an NBA championship for the Warriors, he never ever compares players from today yesterday. Somebody asked me last week, LeBron James, who does he remind you of? And it's interesting because I just saw him 2 nights ago in Cleveland, the gentleman I came up with. I said, there's nobody like him. I said, the only thing, if you want to reach, would be Oscar Robertson. Size, strength, ability to get to any spot on the floor, although Oscar was a much better shooter than LeBron James. But they played, they controlled the game. They controlled it. They controlled games. And Oscar controlled games, and so does LeBron James. But I can't tell you where this team ranks because, we only have 15 minutes. I'm taking too much other time talking about other things, and it would take me 15 minutes to write down the great teams and try to think of them all the time because I really don't go back there in my brain.
That's probably, I would say, the best way to answer that question. And I think, while I said you might hang up on me from answering that question, I think you like this question here to sort of wrap up this great interview here. We're very ignorant here on the East Coast, especially here in Boston. We call ourselves the hub of the universe. We think everything sort of revolves around us, and we sort of apply a generalization to people out in California, very, very laissez-faire, especially when it comes to their professional sports teams. That's definitely not the case up in Northern California. We saw how much that San Francisco Giants title meant when they first won it, I think 2010. We know how dedicated Warriors fans are. They have not won it in 40 years, I believe. Right. Sort of in your best way, I mean, how would you describe what a championship would mean to that community out there?
Well, it would mean the same as it would to Cleveland, who hasn't won any kind of championship in, 54 years, something like that, I believe, since the Browns won in 1964, I guess. You've got football fans, you've got basketball fans, you've got baseball fans, you have fans who like all sports. But out here, I will say this, there are a lot of fans that are specifically Golden State Warriors fans. And they don't venture, a lot of them do, of course, everybody. But they've got some fans who are really, diehard fans of this team. And they're at the games, they cheer, they go crazy. They love this team because not only these players are talented and fun to watch the way they play, they're good people off the court. And the Warriors do a great job of getting people out in the community. And, Steph Curry everybody loves Steph Curry around the United States because they can identify with Steph Curry. He looks like a high school kid out there. Nobody can identify with LeBron James. He's just in another world. Well, they appreciate him, but they can't identify with him. So a lot of people identify with this team, and that gives you a little more of an emotional impact. And they'll be bedlam if they win the NBA championship here. It's going to be celebrated. There'll be a big parade. It's going to mean so much to the ownership. Joe Lacob and Peter Guber, the majority owners who turned this franchise around in a quick 5 years. It's going to be amazing for them. I'm personally, it's nice to be involved, and I've been doing the games for a long time, but I'm not a player. I'm not a coach. I'm not an owner. And, I didn't have anything to do with it. So I'm just happy for this team because they deserve it. And we'll wait and see what happens on that. But it's going to be a big celebration, and these are diehard fans out there. And you can't get, I know this, you can't get a better home crowd in the NBA than you do at Oracle Arena.
Yeah, that's sort of what sort of jumped out to me. I remember watching some random Warriors game out there around 98, 99 when the Celtics were down as well, and that place was just an absolute madhouse. And I was like, whoa, Jesus. And then obviously that sort of stuck with me for so many years, and it's clear that they have, I would say unquestionably, the most committed fan base, especially when it comes to the NBA, almost sort of like a Packers-like local following out there. So it's very clear that it would mean a lot. But Jim, thanks so much for stopping by. Jim Barnett, Comcast Sportsnet Bay Area. You can follow Jim on Twitter at UOGrad66. Jim, once again, thank you so much for joining us on Celtics Beat.
I appreciate it, Larry, very much. Can I just add one thing?
Please do.
How the league has changed. In 1966, when I was the Boston Celtics' #1 draft pick, there were only 10 teams in the league. I got a call from your sports editor of the Boston Globe. We talked for 10 minutes, and here's the question he finally wanted to ask. He said, "Can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "Are you black or white?"
That meant a lot in 66, yeah.
That's meant a lot, but what I'm saying is, how many players, he didn't even know who I was. That's how much it counted back in those days. That's what I'm saying. The whole world has changed that drastically. Whether it meant something socially or not, he didn't even know, because they don't even know, I mean, that's how little it was. Nate Thurmond 3 years earlier was the 3rd overall pick in the draft out of Bowling Green. Someone came up to me, he didn't even know the draft was going on. So no one cared. Today, they care too much. That's what I wanted when you were talking about all the fans and everything. So that's what I'm going to say. Today, they care a little too much sometimes. How's that?
Yeah, it isn't like we have any social media outlets where you can put anything out there in a matter of 2 seconds or anything,
Yeah. All right, have a good day.